Okay, so in a previous video we looked at this spreadsheet that is now on our website as well, and it basically builds blocks by putting in your dimensions or choosing a standard size, and you end up with something like this. Okay, so that's a bodice block that's taken from these dimensions, and you can change all that stuff. So I don't know, let's have a different size like that. Bodice, did you see it change? Okay, so you can use this, and then you can export that and bring it into your graphics program, and you get something like this. So that is the basic block taken from that spreadsheet. So all these key construction points are done for you, and the reason it's worth doing that or using a program to do that is because this is the boring stuff, right? This doesn't change. These are kind of construction points. They change with different sizes, obviously, but it's, I wouldn't say it's pointless, but you know, constructing this is a bit of a pain, you know, and doing it on a piece of paper, and it's always going to be, you're going to start with this anyway, so this is why it's worth programming it. So anyway, from that we produced, let's have a look, that. Okay, now I haven't done a video on this yet, I might do. That has taken the basic block and produced a 4 panel, what's called a winged, this is called a winged seam block. So we've basically got the parts, we've put the seam, we've removed the darts basically from the block and changed their position, and we've ended up with a 4-piece block designed for latex, because obviously these blocks traditionally are designed for sewing. So these darts, you know, you close them up and so on. Well, you can't do that with latex. You've got to get rid of the darts and move them somewhere else because you're gluing. You can't have these sharp points. Anyway, that is probably a complete video in its own right. I just wanted to show how you might use that. So from that, what you see on the screen, we produced this, which is a 4-piece. Remember some of these are flipped, so this is the front of the garment, so there's a mirror image of that. You typically only create half of it, so that's flipped, so that's 1 piece. That's the back, that's also flipped at that point, that's 2, and then you got 3, 4, and there's of course another 2 of those on the other side. Anyway, that makes a garment. Now this particular pattern, we physically made it, and it fits absolutely fine, fits perfectly in fact. So from that we wanted to go ahead and make something else from it, in fact make a crop top. And you might think, well, how on earth do you do that? Well, so you know this fits, so you can use that to work off. You can modify it because you know it fits, right? So for example, this is the front panel. Well, you know the seam's here, so you can do anything you like to this. You can change the neckline and so on. So what we've done is to produce a crop top off that. And there was a couple of techniques used here, which is probably why it's worth just noting it. So what we actually did was we physically printed that and made that full size, and then we worked with the actual print to produce this thing that you see underneath. Now if I just maybe well, you can see it, can't you? So you've got the cutting board and you've got these white pieces of paper, and they are basically the physical bits of paper that we stuck together, and then we played around with it to get a shape that we thought was working. And in fact that's what we did. We carried on and we made a garment and it fits and so on. But it's quite important, if you're going to do that, I think, is to come back into the software and update your pattern in the software, because it means you've then got it for future use. So you're not having to go through that process again. So what I did here was I took some photographs with my camera phone of the pattern pieces, and then I imported them back into this software, sized them to fit, and then I could literally then draw these red lines to follow the physical pattern. Okay, but of course I can then smooth it out a bit. So if I turn off, for example, these pictures, which is this here, let's just I think it's that one there and there, you can see these red lines now are what the pattern pieces were, the physical pattern pieces. So I've drawn them onto my actual pattern in the software, and I'm going to tidy it up a bit. Well, I have tidied it up, so that's the reason for that. So in this next page, what you're seeing, let's move it up a bit so we can size it a bit better on the screen. That's that noise outside, you can hear it. Right, so that is the cleaned up version. Now with the software, there's a couple of things you can do as one of checks really. So this piece obviously glues here. Now this is the point at which it will actually join this dotted line, and of course this is where you cut it, so that's your seam allowance. So the dotted lines will match. Now obviously when you think about it, this piece, you start up here and you're going to glue it and turn it and glue it and whatever, and by the time you get to the bottom here, it will all have joined. So what's quite important is that the length of this dotted line here is exactly the same as the length of this dotted line here, because if they're not, it won't match. You'll have a little bit of latex sticking out. So this is something you can check with your software. So if I select that line there, now in my software it's written that down, it says 25.86. that's how long that dotted line is, 25.86. So if I do the same with this one, that's 25.64. Now, you know, they're not going to be the same, are they? But there's what, 0.2, 0.3 of a millimetre difference, which is, you know, by the time you cut your pattern out manually, you know, it's just not going to, it's not going to matter, is it? So in other words, that seam is the same length as that seam, so they will literally join and there'll be no overlaps. So that's a check that you can do in the software. Another thing you can check, if I just rotate it a little bit, can you see how this curve here obviously will match onto this curve, and it wants to be a nice smooth join. Now we did this manually on the pattern, but you can do it with the software as well. So if I basically take that piece and join it roughly at the dotted line there, something like that, I click again, this is the centre of rotation point in my software. So if I put that there, I can now rotate that pattern piece, yeah, which you would do by when you're gluing, yeah, and you would line up the seams, wouldn't you, which is kind of about sort of there, isn't it, for that initial join. So you can see that this curve here, following it all the way around, it's quite a nice smooth curve. So that's good. That's going to work quite well. And we can check the same here. This thing at the bottom, this one at the bottom is another one that needs to match nicely. So we'll do the same sort of thing here, just as a double check. So again, line the seam up at the bottom like that, back there. Find the rotation centre. It's up the top somewhere, isn't it? Where's it gone? It's another click, isn't it? Click again. There it is. Move that rotation down to there. Let's just zoom in a little bit. It doesn't have to be super accurate. It's back there. Yeah. And now I can rotate the piece at the bottom. Yeah. Swing it around. So we'll rotate it so that the lines, the dotted lines, join up, which is kind of how you would do it if you were gluing the latex. Okay, so we've joined that up, and now I think you can see, hopefully, that this bottom curve, which is about the waistline roughly, is now a smooth flowing curve right into the centre of the garment. It's a nice smooth curve. And also equally, this is like an alternative cut that we did. So again, you can see that is a nice smooth continuous transition piece. So we know from that basically that if we cut this piece out and that piece out, not only will it line up at the seams, but also these curves will be smooth as you follow through. Now obviously you can trim this when you've glued the garment together. Of course you can, and you might have to do a little bit of that, so it's not a big deal, but you might as well get it about right in the first place. And obviously with this, if you cut it accurately, it will all line up and it's all looking like it's going to work. So then the final thing I did with this particular garment is these two pieces, I put them on a single sheet, and I moved this one around and rotated it and so on to try and minimise the width, to try and see if I can get away with the smallest print possible. And then of course all you do then, or I've covered before, from there I go File, Export, PDF, Croptop, I've already done that, Export, Replace, Custom, blah blah blah, export that, and I create a PDF file from that. Okay, which if I zoom out, that's your full size PDF, which you would now print. And of course, because I've got an A4 printer, this is not going to fit on an A4 sheet. So just a little refresher on that. If you remember, we go into print, and by default, this would normally be a default. It will try and print that on one sheet of A4. In other words, it shrinks it down, which it says here, shrink oversize. So the trick with printing these things out is to say it's a poster. If you click on that, then you can now see, and tile scale, you have to make sure that's 100%. I presume you can shrink them down onto the poster, but we're not doing that because we're doing 1:1. So obviously we leave that on as 100%, and this is going to produce 4 pieces of paper, which we can then glue together and make a pattern. So I don't think, actually looking at this, we could never get away with 2, could we? It's not going to work, is it? You're not going to be able to do 2 sheets. So anyway, it's 4 pieces of paper. I suppose the only thing you could possibly do, although it would look a bit messy, wouldn't it? You could sort of overlap them, I guess, and maybe, but then you wouldn't know which bit you were cutting and what have you. So anyway, it's about as good as it's going to get. So it's 4 pieces. Anyway, so there you go. It's just hopefully an interest on a couple of things that you might want to check, and the method involved in taking, it's kind of a pseudo computer method, isn't it? This, we took a computer printed pattern that we know works. we then physically worked with the bits of paper, cutting them to the shapes we wanted and so on, and we knew that worked. But then I think it's quite important to go back to the software to put it back in, because this document now we've got for future reference. If we want to do another one of these, we just print another one out, or slightly modify it or whatever, change the neckline or whatever. So then becomes quite easy, and it works. So there wasn't a massive amount of effort to do that, and it's worked quite well. All right, well, if there's any interest, I might do a video on this, how you actually create this. It's not difficult, but there's a few steps to do, so we'll see about maybe doing that. All right, okay, thanks for now anyway. Cheers, bye.